Greetings friends and welcome back to another tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about backing tracks, what they are, why you would use them, how we make them, and most importantly, how do we use backing tracks incorporated into our live show using a laptop and the Behringer X32 rack. Let's get started. Unless you've been living under a rock for the past 15 to 20 years, you probably already know what backing tracks are, but for those who don't, a backing track is a pre-recorded instrument or a series of instruments which is played in sync to a live performer. So any of you that are game enough to have gone to karaoke, let's say, will probably have a pretty good idea of what this is about. So you can imagine you go to the karaoke bar, you've got your microphone, you sing real, live, but there'll be a track behind you that provides the accompaniment or the backing instrumentation. That is one example of a backing track. Now, believe it or not, a lot of bands also use backing tracks to help enhance their own performance. Now, not all, of course, but particularly when you get up to the semi-professional and professional level, and certainly when a band is touring, backing tracks are being used more and more to help deliver a powerful, consistent performance night after night. Now, it's worth saying that not all bands use backing tracks and not all bands need to use backing tracks. It really depends on the kind of show that you are trying to perform. Also consider that a backing track could be something as simple as a click track in your ears to help guide the band to keep time. It could just be some simple intro or outro effects, or it could be a full-blown performance and indeed their whole concert featuring backing tracks in sync with the live performance. Now, like many of you watching this video, I presume, my band Renegade is predominantly a cover band, and what that means is we will typically perform other people's songs across, 3 or 4 sets in an evening. Now, we've decided recently that we're going to start incorporating some backing tracks into the music that we play. And because this is songs that people know, there is an expectation from the audience that these songs be delivered in a certain way that they recognize. And sometimes part of what makes them recognizable is a melody or a significant part of the song that is played on an instrument that we don't physically have in the band. And this is a perfect example of why we might incorporate a backing track to fill in that gap. Now, what we're not interested in doing as a band is to use backing tracks to replace the parts that we could and should be playing ourselves. And unfortunately, that does happen a lot in the scene as well. But in our case, and what I'm going to show you today, we're going to create backing tracks to fill in those little bits that we might feel we need. Now, in order to do this, we're going to need some hardware and we're going to need some software. So let's take a quick look at that now. In terms of hardware requirements, we're only needing a few things today. First of all, obviously we're going to need the Behringer X32 rack because that's what this whole tutorial is about. Just make sure that it's equipped with the XUSB card on the rear of the device. That will then plug into a laptop. I'm actually using a Surface Pro today, but any old laptop will do. So we're going to connect those two devices with a USB cable. So X32 rack equipped with the XUSB card at the rear, a USB cable plugged into either a laptop or Surface Pro or some sort of device which we'll be running our backing tracks from. And we also need to be connected to the X32 rack's network. I've chosen to use a Wi-Fi router, so I just need to make sure that my laptop or my Surface is able to connect to the X32 rack's network. That'll be important because we need to get a program called X32 Edit. Now that's by Behringer, and effectively what that does is it gives us I'm using Windows, so a Windows compatible method of controlling the X32 from the laptop. Now, in addition to X32 Edit, obviously we're going to need a DAW or a digital audio workstation of some description. I've chosen to use Reaper today because I'm finding more and more people are using Reaper. It's obviously very, very affordable, very powerful, offers very, very good value for money. And I think it's widely used enough now that even if you're just getting into backing tracks and DAWs and all of that stuff, you've probably got a copy of Reaper that you're learning to use. We also need to make sure that we download and install the XUSB Behringer drivers. These are the drivers that will install into Windows, so it will understand how to run the Behringer X32 with all of the things that we're going to be doing today. Once we've got all of those things installed, we are ready to go, so let's get into it. Okay, so I'm checking my Wi-Fi just to make sure that the Wi-Fi is connected. There we are, I'm connected to my X32. I open Xedit, and when I do, you will see the screen appears and it prompts me to connect to my X32 rack. So I'm going to hit connect, and it will ask me which way I want to transfer the information. Do I want to take the settings from the X32 mixer and import them into this PC screen, or do I want to send whatever I've configured on the PC screen across to the mixer? So obviously let's just load up and see what the mixer has on it. We'll bring it over to the PC. Nothing should change because I've actually configured this earlier. But in just a moment you will see that all of the channels will be labeled and numbered, and this will reflect the state that the X32 is in at the moment. Once the X32 Edit software is successfully connected to the X32 rack, it's now time to configure Reaper. Okay, so I've opened Reaper and I just want to confirm a few of the settings before I start. So if I hold down Control and hit P, it will open my device setup. So you can see here I'm under device, and there's a few things we need to take note of. So firstly, we need to make sure that we're using the XUSB ASIO driver. In other words, it's talking to, or it's using the drivers from the X32. We also want to make sure that our output range is from channel 1 to 32, because the card on the X32 accommodates 32 input and output channels. And while I'm here, the other thing I want to check is the sample rate. You can see that it's set at 48,000 Hertz or 48 kilohertz. Now that can be essentially whatever you want, but it must match what the X32 is using. So we'll leave that at 48,000 Hertz, and I'll go back over to Xedit. Now in the Xedit screen, if I click on Setup, and I go across to the Mixer tab, at the very top you can see that that's also set to 48 kilohertz. So again, we just need to make sure that those two settings are consistent between the X32 Edit software and also with Reaper. Okay, so if you didn't want to use the X32 Edit software, or if you didn't have access to it, you can actually access the sample rate menu directly from the X32 rack interface itself. To do so, click on the very top right hand button labeled Setup, and you'll see on the global menu that appears in that first grey column, we can see that we have the options for setting our sample rate. It's currently on 48 kilohertz, but it can also be set to 44.1 by rotating that second dial. So we just want to make sure that it's set on 48 kilohertz for today. Alright, so one more thing while we're on this window. We've set the 32 in and 32 out channels. That's great in Reaper. We just need to make sure that the X32 is also equipped to send those channels and receive those channels via the card. So if I go over to my Xedit software again, I click on Setup. This time if I go over the very right hand side, I can see there's a tab there labeled Card. I click on Card, it comes up with a picture of the SUSB, and I can see that that's set for 32 in and 32 out. Now that may not be, there are other options, so just set it to 32 in, 32 out, and we're good to go. Using the X32 interface directly, we can hit the Setup button once again, and then use the arrow keys to scroll all the way over to the right hand side. That's the card tab, and you'll see quite clearly there we have our configuration for our card, and it should be set to 32 in and 32 out. Okay, now the next thing we need to do is to close this window and go into our routing menu. And under the inputs, we'll see that effectively down the bottom here we have two modes. We have a record mode and we have a play mode. Just make sure we're set to the play mode. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in just a moment. Okay, so to switch between play and record mode on the X32 interface itself, we would go down to the routing menu. That's the third button down on the left. And we can see now that we're presented with this view which shows us all of our different inputs, whether we're on play or record mode. Now down in the bottom right hand corner of the screen you can see that I'm on play mode at the moment. I've got the little yellow triangle, and if I scroll the sixth wheel, that's the last wheel on the right hand side of the interface, you can see that I can move back between visualizing both the record and the play mode. Now if I push that button in, you'll see that it switches over now to record mode, and instead of the yellow triangle, I get the red circle. Okay, so we just need to make sure that that is set to play mode, and then we're good to continue. Now it's time to go and find our backing tracks. Now, if you're in an original band, or if you already have your instrumentation recorded somewhere, maybe as part of your studio session files, then obviously that's what you're going to be using for this example. But for myself, in a cover band, and that's a band obviously that plays other people's songs, I need to go and find backing tracks to songs that are not mine, and this can often be quite difficult to do. But there is a good site that I found called Karaoke Version. It's at karaoke-version.com. I'm on the website right now, as you can see. And this has a whole lot of instrumentation for very popular songs that a lot of people will know. And so this has been my go-to for probably about a year at least now, for finding decent quality backing tracks or instrumentation which we can build a backing track. Now, it's not the original versions of the songs, but it's pretty close, and certainly individually with each instrument it's good enough for what we need to do. So let's say that we're trying to do a cover of Darius Rucker's Wagon Wheel. So I go to karaokeversion.com, type in Wagon Wheel, if I can spell it, there we go, Wagon Wheel. There it is, right up top. So we open that up. And what you'll see is the page opens and you can see all of the individual instruments, these are called stems, have their own recording. So if I was to go to, say, the percussion part, we'll just play that here. Right, so we can isolate individual parts of this song. If we listen to the whole thing put together. Right, so as you can tell, it's not the original version, but it's pretty close. So I want to do two things here. First of all, I want to download the click track to this song, and that's assuming I don't want to make my own click track. So just for simplicity's sake, we solo the click track. You can see that I've checkmarked this box to give me a little bit of an extra count in the beginning. That'll give me a count in when I pull all this stuff into Reaper later on. And then I go down to download. Now, I've purchased this song prior, but if you hadn't, obviously you'll click this button, you'll purchase the song. I think it's about $2.99 as of this recording. And you can come back to this song at any time and download other tracks or all the tracks, whatever you like. So you have effectively purchased to access all of the tracks within this particular song. All right, so that's now downloaded. That's great. The second track I want to download is a combination of all of the instruments that I need, but none of the ones that we don't. So let me just reset this. Now, we don't need the click track because we just downloaded that. Going down the line here, we don't need drums because I play them in the band, so that's my role. Percussion, I'm assuming that's shakers and claps that we heard earlier, so I'll leave that in, that's fine. Bass guitar we have, so we don't need that. I don't need any of these guitars, I don't think, so I'm just going to take them all out. The piano, our keyboardist is playing piano for this song, so we don't need that track. Might be good to have the synth though, because you can't play that at the same time, so we'll leave that in there. The fiddle we absolutely need because it's important in this song. It's actually, you know, quite featured in this song, but we don't have a fiddle player, so that we'll use. And of course all the backing vocals and lead vocals we do ourselves, so we don't need that. So what we're left with really is this. Right, so just the fiddle, a little bit of a background synth, and some claps. And that's all we need. So I go ahead, I click, and I download that. And so now we have two tracks downloaded, a click track and our sort of cumulative 3 tracks into one, which is going to be effectively the backing track that we're going to use. So in addition to the 2 tracks that we already have, the click track and the instrument track, it's also common to incorporate what they call a vocal cue track. And this is literally just a recording of somebody saying or counting things in for you. So the metronome helps, but if you had something that said 1, 2, 3, 4 to count you into the beginning of the song, then there's no ambiguity about that at all. Or it could even be somebody saying chorus in 4, 3, 2, 1, or outro, next song is this, or change guitars, this is played in the key of E. So in addition to those 2 channels, the vocal cue channel just gives us additional information about what's going on in this backing track. This is actually going to be a track that only the musicians will hear on stage. It's not going to go front of house, so you can use it to help you guide your way through the songs. All right, we're over in Reaper again, and now we're going to import those 2 files that we downloaded. I'll just pull this to the side a touch. Here we go. So I've got my click and I have my backing track. So let's pull the click in first. We'll just drop it in there. And we'll do the same now for the backing track. So there's my 2 tracks so far. I'll just zoom out here. Now, of course, these won't be lined up, but the good thing about downloading these files is that usually they're all the same length, like exactly the same length, so it shouldn't be hard to do. Now, of course, the caveat to that was that the click track that we downloaded, if you recall, actually had an extra count in. But the 2 files should end at the same time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to pull these 2 files and just make sure that they line up. There they go. They do. Now this is moving in a grid fashion, but if you hold down Shift, you're able to sort of move the files, you know, freely. and they're loaded up. All right, so we think that that should be good to go, but when I click start, we can see the music is playing, but we don't hear anything. And so in order to get this to work, we have to start configuring the channels so that we can tell Reaper where to send those channels to the USB card on the X32. Now I just quickly want to go back to the X32 Edit software. You remember earlier that under the routing tab, under the inputs, we spoke very briefly about record mode and play mode. And this is going to come in very, very important now. And I'll just take a moment to explain what these are about. So with the X32, when you connect the card to a computer, you have two modes available to you. One is record mode and one is play mode. Now record mode, as you would sort of suspect, is when you plug all the instruments into the X32, you want to get a multi-channel recording of your band, and so you set it to record mode, and it would send the information to your computer in multiple tracks, right, which for you to go and mix later. So assuming you did that, and you had let's say, a recording of your last gig somewhere at a venue, and then it comes time to play that venue again, one of the things you can do with this virtual soundcheck is to play that recorded performance from last time back into the X32 and out through the PA. And the reason they call that a virtual soundcheck is because if you're familiar with the concept of a soundcheck, it's where the band plugs in and they sort of get all their levels right and what have you. But because it can play back a performance that was recorded earlier, the X32 thinks that's actually another live performance. So you can play your recorded performance back through the X32 and out to a PA system, even with the other band members not being there, and the X32 doesn't know any different, and so it thinks it's musicians playing, and you can actually mix every channel and start doing that sound check without anyone being there. It's a very cool feature. Now we're going to use the play feature to play back recorded backing tracks, right? That's the only difference. So on record mode, you'll notice that the 4 orange lights above are saying to me, when I'm using the X32 in record mode, the first 8 channels are coming directly from the X32. So that would be the first 8 things that I plug into it, so guitars, drums, what have you. The next 8 will also be local inputs on the X32. And then I also have the S16 stage box, remember, so I have 16 additional inputs, and there they are there. So channels 17 to 24 and 25 to 32. So essentially, when I'm recording live, all of the Behringer X32 inputs and all of the S16 inputs are available for me to plug instruments in and record them to my computer. And if I did that, then in Reaper, when I recorded them, I would see those 32 channels all split, and that performance would be recorded. When I set the X32 over to play mode, it's mostly the same, except I've told the unit that when you play back from that card, when you're on play mode and you're playing the instrumentation back through the card, my recorded performance, I only want you to play channels 25 through 32 from the card. So the first 24 channels are still open for me to pretty much do what I want. And obviously I'm going to have the other instruments, the real instruments, plugged into the X32 for that as well. So when I am playing back through the X32, channels 1 to 8, 9 to 16, 17 to 24 are still my X32 and my S16, but the last 8 channels are going to be playing back from the card or from my computer. Okay, so just to clarify, the record mode is all about sending information through your X32 to a recording device, and the play mode is the opposite. It's using your recording and that device to send that information back to the X32. So it's essentially the opposite movement of data back and forth between those two devices. Okay, so then we ask the question, well, when I was in Reaper, why then, when I pressed start, did I see the music playing, but I can't hear anything? And the answer is because we haven't assigned the channels for this stuff to be sent back to the X32 in. Let me explain what I mean. So I said to you that as part of our routing setup, that the last 8 channels of my X32 are going to be played back from the card. And so if I look now at my channels, and let's just go to channels 17 to 32, the last couple of channels, you can see that from channel 25 to 32, this last group of 8 channels, all of these channels are going to be played back from my computer. So essentially all I have to do now is tell Reaper which channels to send each of those tracks that we've got. Now we know, for example, that the click has been set up here on channel 25, and you could set it on any channel you like, but in my setup it's on channel 25. Any vocal cues that I add will be on 26, and the backing track itself is going to be on channel 27. So for what we have in Reaper today, the click track and the actual backing track, we need channels 25 to 27. Okay, so let's go back to Reaper. And let's look at the click track first. I'm going to go down the bottom to where my faders are, and you can see this little button that says routing. If I click that, I'll just lift it up, we have a new hardware output that we need to add, and we need to essentially scroll right down to the bottom and tell Reaper that this particular track is going to be output to channel 25. So when we press play, it's going to go out through channel 25. The X32 knows that channel 25 is going to come from the computer, so it should play the click. Right, so now let's just go back a bit. We're going to press start again. There we go. We can see it playing, but we've assigned the click channel. So let's go back to the Xedit software, and we can see now on channel 25 that it's there. If I bring up the volume, there it is. Okay, now we've got sound coming into my X32. Now this is great because it also means, because I'm running in-ear monitors, that everybody now in my band has control over channel 25 to make that click as loud or as soft as they want. It also means that because this is a click track, this is not one of those channels that we would ever send front of house, right? So on our main output, it's always going to be pulled right down, right? We simply don't hear it. The same would actually be for any vocal cues, any count-ins or any words, you know, that we're putting in our in-ears to help us remember the song or to cue, you know, changes. We wouldn't have that going front of house. So these are always going to be down front of house, but we might have different volumes depending on, you know, which musician wants to hear what. All right, so now let's go to the track. We're going to do the same. I'll just stop this. So over on the wagon wheel track itself, we hit the routing button, and we wanted this to output to channel 27. Right down the bottom, channel 27, there it is. All right, let's start this again. There we go, both channels are playing. We go back over to the Xedit software, and there is our backing channel. And we can bring the click in as loud or as soft as we want. So now we've got control not only over the backing track, but also individual sounds within the backing track. Now, we're just dealing with one stereo backing track in this example here. In my band, I actually create multi-tracks in Reaper. So I might have one that's got piano, one that's got fiddle, one that's got a mandolin, or so, you know, harmonica, and they're all separate channels being streamed to separate channels in this 8 block that's coming from the card. And so while it's okay to have a stereo track that we've created today, having more channels like that where you can control individual instruments in your backing track mix gives you a lot more freedom to be you know, a little bit more flexible with how you want to hear it. So if I want to hear the fiddle a little bit louder, but maybe the bass player wants to hear more of the hand claps or the click, we can all adjust that ourselves with our own device within the in-ear monitoring system and have complete control over exactly what we want to hear, including individual instruments within the backing track. Alright, so I've opened a real-life example now that Renegade uses. We are currently learning Luke Combs' Fast Car, and you can see that much like our other example, we have some tracks here, but it's not just one backing track. The backing track itself is actually split out into individual instruments. You can see that I've actually got, you know, 7 or 8 instruments there, including the click, and I even have some vocal cues as well. And so they're going to be the, you know, the words that will count us in and tell us where the changes in the songs are. Because this is a new song, that's kind of a helpful guide for us to have right about now. We may end up muting it later, easy enough to do if we had to, but for now it's in there. And so when I play this particular example, remember that it's essentially the same as the example we looked at. It's just that I've broken the backing track out into additional individual instruments. All right, so we click start. 1, 2, 3. So you can hear the vocal cues there. The faders are moving up. Now some of these channels are not being used at all for this particular track. But if I go over to the X32, you can see those cues counting us into the different parts of the songs. The click track is there, and we've got potentially another 6 or 7 instruments that we can adjust individually, and that's the point of doing it this way, as opposed to just having one backing track which doesn't have any control over the instrumentation within that track. Okay, now once again, if this was being played back through in a real performance, the click and the vocal cues, so channel 25 and 32, would not be coming front of house. They would only be getting used in our individual in-ear mixes so we can hear as musicians what's going on between us. So if you've understood and followed everything so far, you should now have a backing track and a click track which you can take out live to a gig with you using your laptop and your X32, and you should be able to play backing tracks along with your band. But things aren't always that simple. If you haven't done a lot of work with backing tracks, one of the things you may find is that it's a bit daunting trying to play along with them and stay in time with them without a lot of practice. But even being comfortable playing to a click track isn't the full story. Often what happens in a live capacity is that songs have a tendency to push and pull with their tempos. So if you play songs live and you don't use a click, one of the things you notice is that your choruses might be a little bit quicker, your verses might be a little bit slower. Now this is actually a very deliberate thing to create energy in the live space. And the best backing tracks are ones that can also do that with you. So in the real world scenario, rather than just applying a straight sustained click track as your backing, it sometimes makes sense to have a tempo that fluctuates along with the same way that your band fluctuates. To know how that actually happens, it's always good to start with a live recording of the song that you're putting a backing track to. When we perform the song Wagon Wheel, we actually play the song about 5 beats a minute faster than what the original is. So while we've gone through the process of downloading backing tracks from online, what we find is that they're a little bit slow for how we play it live. So the way I create backing tracks in the real world is to first of all start with a live recording of the song, set the tempos based on the live recording, our live playing of that song, and then manipulate the backing track to fit that tempo. Now, in addition to tempo, the other thing that changes a lot is that you might actually be performing this song in a different key. It might be lower or higher in pitch to what the original was, and that can be for a number of reasons. It could be to facilitate a guitar change. It could be because the vocal register of your singer might not be the same as the singer of the original song, but there are reasons that that needs to be done sometimes. And so you might need to do what's called transposition, where you'll actually take the song and drop or raise the pitch to suit how you perform it live. The other thing that can often happen live is that your arrangement, your structure of that song might be slightly different to what the original is. And so it might mean cutting and pasting sections of the backing track to do things like doubling a chorus or having a breakdown in the middle of the song where there isn't actually a doubling of a chorus or a breakdown of that song in the original version. So once again, as I said at the outset of this tutorial, we're aiming to deliver the best performance possible. So when we create our backing tracks, we are trying to make the backing tracks work via the way that we play. We're not trying to mold ourselves to fit the backing track. If we do that, we'll actually find that even though our band now has the full accompaniment, things will feel stale because it's just not us and the way that we perform it. Now, one more significant challenge, and one that I'm going to leave for a separate video, is being able to cue your backing tracks and to start and stop and move between them seamlessly without interrupting your show. There's a little bit to it, but you've come most of the way, so keep an eye out for that video. So that about wraps it up for this tutorial. A lot of content covered today. Let me know down in the comments, do you use backing tracks in your live band? If you do, let me know how you're running them. And if you refuse to use backing tracks, let me know why also in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Follow all the socials, do all the right things. And yeah, come on over to Twitch and let's talk live and keep the party going. Until then, bye for now.